Okay, so chapter 23 is a big chapter. It's where we are taking all the philosophy that we were talking about with the oneness of God, and we are applying it to our Jewish traditions. So we're also coming back around to the very first chapters of the Tanya, chapter 1 through 5, really, and understanding the same exact thing, but now with the more Kabbalistic terms that we know. So, for example, like in the very beginning of the Tanya, we were introduced to 3 different planes of existence in this earth of like energy. So we had Kedusha. Kedusha is holiness. So anything that has to do with, let's say, a Torah scroll would be like the most perfect example of Kedusha. Like something directly holy, and this is a whole realm. Then we had Klipa. Klipa means a shell, right? Like you can even use that word to describe the peel of an orange, right? So lekalef means to peel, the verb. So klipa is the shell that covers over the holiness, meaning that the holiness, well, that's how we understand it now. Now we can understand, okay, I'm all over the place. So the klipa is the shell that covers over the holiness. And we were taught in chapter 1 and 2 that there's 2 types of klipa. There's klipat noga, which is like that shell that's kind of translucent, where you can kind of see the holiness within if you look closely, and you can access it. So you can actually unpeel the shell and get to the holiness and work with it, and elevate it. And then there's the opaque shell, like the shell of a walnut, let's say, that completely is hard and you have to break it, right? So that shell is completely conceals the holiness, and we actually stay away. It's almost like the shell it's like poison. Like we don't go there. Now, last week we learned about different types of will. Why are we all here? Why does the world exist? Why did God create the world? Because he wanted to. So every single thing that exists comes about through God's will. If he did not want it to be here, it wouldn't be here. Because remember, we was doing in chapter 19 and 20 this philosophy about the oneness of God, that if God created the world, then there really is nothing that's outside of that. That would be impossible. It's like trying to contemplate the end of the universe. Like, what's after the universe? And if you really try to break your brain and imagine it, when I did it, I freaked myself out. Because, first of all, because we're finite. We are within that creation. So anything, if God created it, it's impossible that it would be outside, because our belief is that there is nothing outside of God. So even the evil is created because God willed it to be here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. And what we talked about in chapter 22 was different aspects, different types of will. It's not the evil doesn't come about from the same type of will as the holiness. What's the different types? So we have our core will, what we really want. And let's say you can find these examples in your own life, or somebody who wants to build a house. Let's say we're building the mikvah, and the core will, like the point, the objective is to build a mikvah. In order to get to that objective, we need to have a bunch of meetings, meet with the contractors, meet with the HVAC, meet with the designers, meet with all the meetings and all the decisions that have to be made, and picking out and choosing out. All that is like, I don't relish meeting, and it's not like, oh yay, like I'm born to meet with HVAC. Like, no, like I'm doing it happily because it's getting me to my core goal. So that would be like an indirect will, or more like, it's called chitzoniut haratzon. There's pnimiut haratzon, the core will, inner will, and then there's outer will. Then, in addition to outer will, there are the things that we do that we over the shoulder because we have to, because we like grin and bear it, or maybe not even grin, bear it. like Shelley was saying last week with the DMV, or with immigration, or with a conversation you have with a toxic person that they're a part of your family, so you have that conversation. But you don't want to. You don't really want to. But you do it because part of you, it's necessary, so you want to. But you don't want to. You don't want to do it. When you have that interaction with that individual, or with that thing that you're doing, you kind of protect your energy. You don't give it your face because you're not connecting to that thing. So in Kabbalah, it's called Bechinat Achoraim, which means Achoraim is the back. It's like you're giving it over the shoulder. So when God creates the evil, this is still a review of chapter 22, God is creating it, but he's not showing his face to it. He's not connecting to it. Like when you do connect, let's say you're speaking with your child, you're going to give them eye contact. You're going to want that connection. But somebody who drains you, you may have to interact, but over the shoulder. Why does God create evil if he doesn't want to interact, if he doesn't want to connect with it?
Duality.
Yeah. To give us the freedom of choice, to make the living dynamic experience. Because if we were not to have the evil, and when I say evil, I mean evil, but I also mean ego. Even though ego is natural, yet what it is other. Ego means my needs, I am a separate existence than the truth of God, that we're all really one and we're all really connected. And that was the end of chapter 22. That's the mountains of separation. Like when you're really in an ego space, you don't really care about the next person's ego. They're in conflict with each other. It's only when you go beneath the surface and you find your shared emotions that you can resolve the conflict. But when you're in that ego space, it's separateness. It's my needs, it's your needs. We're adverse. So where was I? About God, about the evil. So yeah. So actually, if you get down to a subtle level, ego is part of this category of things that God creates because he has to, over the shoulder. And why does he do that? Because if we were not to see ourselves as separate, then connecting to God would be automatic. We wouldn't actually be separate ever. We would just be part of God because that's the real truth. So actually, the separation is a construct. And in a way, it's actually more incredible to ponder the construct that God created than the actual holiness. The actual holiness is like it's obvious. It's a real truth. The construct of seeing ourselves as separate from the truth of God, the truth of holiness, is the construct.
I have a little hard time of understanding that he creates evil. I understand the duality with no bad is no good, with no right is no left. I understand that. But to create people bad to begin with and not giving them a choice.
Don't forget, God doesn't create bad people. God creates the ego within people. And it's the freedom of choice that God gives us of, are we going to choose to operate from the ego space, or are we going to choose to operate from...
I understand that.
And remember, babies are not born evil.
Right, I understand that. Like we said that last week, but we have our ego to choose if we want to operate from the ego or from the spirit soul that we have, right? With the godly soul. But if you say he created from his behind, we all created this in the same level. We all created the same level, like from front of God, not in the behind of God. We choose it to be good or to be evil. So what he did create from the back?
That's a really good question. So parts. We have parts. And actually, this is, again, we're going back, we're understanding chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with new eyes. So in chapter 1 and 2, we learned about that we have two souls. We have a godly soul created from face to face of God. That's the piece of us that is infinite. It will never die. it is God. So actually, to find God, you don't have to look up to the heavens. You don't have to climb a mountain. Right here. That's the face-to-face aspect that we have within us. We also have our natural soul. Remember, our animal soul. Animal and that shared with animals, the instinct to survive, the instinct to procreate, the instinct to pursue pleasure. That type of pleasure, there's also pleasure in God, but that aspect of us is created, part of that aspect is created, the outer will is part of that. And there are parts of ourselves that is over the shoulder.
Okay, I get it now.
Yeah, so there's three planes.
Soul created for all of us behind his shoulder.
And I would venture to say there's part of the animal soul is actually created from the outer will. But there are parts. I'm going to actually look up exactly which part of if we do have be over the shoulder in our soul. I actually think I would rather err on the side of saying that our animal soul is from the external will versus over the shoulder. Our animal soul really is, we work with it. We interact with our animal soul. We don't shun our animal soul. So I would say that and it's actually in chapter 2, it says it's straight out created from Klipat Noga, the shining Klipa, the one that's translucent. What's over the shoulder stuff is more anything that is part of the Torah. This is actually foreshadowing where we're going in this chapter. That is Asur. So anything in the Asur, like do not kill, do not steal, the do not mitzvahs of the Torah are that aspect. In our life, though, we do experience the urge to be separate from God. When we do experience that, would be the ego. That aspect of our ego that wants to be its own thing. It's subtle. I'm going to look into it exactly how to find the line. But as a general idea, ego comes from this. It's true. I'm actually not sure, because part of the ego is you can transform it and channel it along with your mission, and part of it is, but then the aspect of it being separate and being a covering over of God.
When it's not balanced.
Yeah.
Like,
Let me come back to that. I would like to think about that more.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Can we go back to the 3 planes of living? There's Kedusha, Klipa, and the third one?
Yeah, there's 2 parts of Klipa. And that's what actually this exact same thing that we're trying to figure out where's the line. So there's Klipa Noga, which is Noga.
Noga.
Yeah, Noga means shining. Okay. So that's the middle one, the translucent one. And Klipa Tmeot, the impure, is the one that's bound. It's called Asur. Asur, the things that are do nots in the Torah.
Not Opeg. You said Klipa, Opeg. No?
It's opaque, yes.
Opaque.
Yes. Actually, the word Asur means bound. It means do not, but it also means bound, because it's bound to the Klipa. So we don't interact with it.
So this is why you say 3.
Yes.
That's
the third one.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Well, it seems like that would be the moment where you make a choice. And if you don't have the option to make a choice, if you don't have the ego, then you'd be just like when you say just like the angels.
Spiritual robots.
You will always have the ego. You can't survive in this planet without it. You just need to learn how to make the right choices.
Exactly.
Which is all come to awareness. If you don't have awareness, you don't know if you choose good or bad.
And that's why the tzaddikim, we also learned about in chapter 1 and 2, how there's some certain people are tzaddikim that they've transformed their ego. But even tzaddikim, they do things to remain grounded on this earth. For example, they eat food, right? Because if they were not to eat food, they would rather live a spiritual existence above it all. But because they realize that they're put in a body for a purpose, they interact as a human being, and that grounds them into their ego, which is just the fact that they're alive. So that was all chapter 22. Now for chapter 23. So chapter 23 brings us to so we talked a lot about the outer will and the over the shoulder, but let's get into the inner will. That's chapter 23. What what is the inner will? What did God create all this world for? What was the purpose? The purpose was the Torah and the mitzvot. That's the inner will. The whole world, the whole creation, and the whole tzimtzum, which is another thing from last week I want to bring back into this. So the whole construct of how God came from infinity and squished his light step by step by step by step, it's called the tzimtzum, so that there is godliness hidden on a earth that appears to be separate. All of that was in order so that the mitzvot and the Torah would be studied on this earth and the mitzvot would be performed on this earth. That's the inner will, the point of all the world that we have around us, so that we could find God within it, so that we can utilize the wood to create this bima, so that we could utilize all the materials to create the Torah and the ink to write it, and the wood that we use and the schach that we use to build the sukkah, and the flour and the water that we use to bake the challah. All of that earth was so that we can interact with the physical stuff and do physical mitzvot, because that's the nature of a mitzvah. After we pass, we cannot perform mitzvahs. That's why that's why we do the Kaddish. That's why we say the Kaddish prayer for the souls that have passed on. They actually depend on our actions. That's why we do things in their memory, because they can't anymore. And that's why our Judaism, our Jewish values, so much prioritize life, so much celebrate life. Other cultures are not that way. But in our culture, life is where it's at. It's all about life. Even though after death, and even though souls are, they're unbound by their physical bodies and their physical ego and experience, yet we're not striving for death. We're not learning all about the afterlife. We're not. We're learning about why this life is so important. Because what we have here at this limited time on earth that we have, whether, it's 120 years, is to make the most of every minute we have. We're like Super Mario with that ate the extra whatevers, and we've got to do it. So, and then this chapter goes on and explains how, actually chapter 4 and 5, it's understanding chapter 4 and 5 through a new lens, how the mitzvot accomplishes God's will and therefore connects us to God, and the Torah even more. And now we're going to analyze that a little bit. So, we're not getting to that yet. So, the mitzvot. When someone dear to you asks you to do them a favor, what's really going on? When you do that favor, it's an opportunity for connection, because they're asking you for their will. They're asking you to do something. This is what they want, especially if it's like, if you tell your husband, I saw this beautiful, in that case, me, I found this beautiful earrings. Can you buy it for me? I could have bought it for myself. I could have done that. But I didn't want to. I wanted him to go to the store and buy it for me. And he went to New York and he tried, but they were out of stock. And I'm like, shoot, I should have just bought it for myself. But still, I'm willing to wait till they come back in stock so that he can put the effort and buy me these earrings so he knows it's what I want, so he doesn't have to guess. I'm telling him, I like these earrings. I tried them on. I want it to come from him. When God asks us to do the mitzvahs, can he do it himself? Technically he's God. He can do anything. He can create whatever he wants. But he wants to hold back and ask us to do it, so that he's almost like extending an arm, and so that we can grasp it. And in Kabbalah, it's the mitzvot are actually called the limbs of the king being God. And in fact, the Kabbalah says there's 248 limbs of the body. Well, there's 248 positive mitzvot, which means mitzvot that are a do, an action. So it's all aligning that the limbs, the mitzvot, are limbs of God. And when we use our physical bodies to perform those mitzvahs, those actionable mitzvot, are mitzvot we do with our body. They're not the do-nots, the passive ones. We actually need to use our hands to shake the lulav and the etrog. We actually need to use our mouth to eat the matzah. We actually need to use part of our body, even if it's just a touch on an app to give tzedakah, we're still using our body to do that. So when we use our body to do that mitzvah, there's a connection happening. And then the Tanya goes on to analyze what kind of, analyze how our body becomes a vehicle for godliness, for our godly soul, which is God. So our limbs become a vehicle for God. So it's like, and further than that, the power of movement that we have is becoming united with God. So to analyze the difference, we don't have to, but the Tanya talks about it. So it's like, if you get it, good. But don't, in other words, don't stress about this whole analysis. So like, let's say our actual physical limbs becomes like drones for God. Like there's a drone that does anything the drone operator wants it to do. So it doesn't have a will of its own. You're not going to have a drone that decides to go somewhere else. It doesn't have a decision power. It's programmed to be a robot, to do whatever the drone operator directs it to go up, it will go up. Take a picture, it will take a picture. Whatever, right? But the operator must put effort into operating the robot. That's our limbs. It's a confusing an analogy because that's our limbs to God's will. But the power of movement that we utilize is more like the limbs are to us. In other words, I don't have to think like a drone operator before I move my arm. It's more automatic. You know, I just want to get up in the morning. I just like, whatever I do, all the movements that I do, I'm not putting conscious effort the way a drone operator must consciously operate a drone. So the power of movement within us, the fact that we can move our bodies and we can use our hands, use our power of movement to shake the lulav and the etrog, that power of movement is united with God's will like limbs of God's will. They're limbs of God's will. They're the body of God's will. And then our physical limbs become like the robots, the vehicles of God's will. So, did you understand? But the point of the matter is that when we do a mitzvah, our physical bodies are becoming vehicles for God. And therefore, vehicles for God's will. Because again, when he writes in the Torah, shake the lulav and etrog on Sukkot, he's telling us what he wants. He's telling us, buy that jewelry for me. Let's analyze Torah. Torah is a more intense, direct unification with God. Because Torah is God's brain. And that's what I'd like to read inside. On this is what took me forever to find because it's actually just a reference. It's on the second page. It's like scanning all the words and I was like up and down. There it is. So it's at the top of the page. Similarly, all the letter combinations of the Torah, the Pentateuch is the 5 books, the prophets, and the writings, so that's the Tanakh, are also expressions of God's will and wisdom, which are united with the blessed Ein Sof. Ein Sof means infinity. Ein Sof means no end. In a perfect unity, since he is the knower and the knowledge, and in the brackets, and the subject known. So this idea, this Kabbalistic idea, it's in the Zohar, which is the the main source of Kabbalah that we have today. It's from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so like from 2,000 years ago. So it says that God is, it's not like when we study. It's not like when we study science, let's say, or we go to university course, and we have our textbook, which is the knowledge. We have our brain, which is the knower, and we have Amada, Hu Yodea, Hu Yadua. So the knowledge is the ability to understand. There's the known, which is what we are going to understand, and then there's the knower, which is the professor, and then hopefully me when I learn it, right? So all of it's separate. I am going to study science. I am going to study math. With Hashem, He is the knowledge. He is the ability to understand, and He is the knower. So in other words, what we're saying is that God is the Torah. He is the knowledge. It's not that God wrote the Torah and they're two separate things. It's all one. And on this earth, it's like, what are you even talking about? Like, there's this and there's that. But somehow it works in the infinity world, and where there isn't a difference between time and space. It's when we're studying the Torah, we are studying God. Done. So it's also on the first page where I skipped. Actually, it's said twice, so it's on the first page, but you could stay on the same page, the very next paragraph that is opposite the Hebrew. This is what it is meant by the statement that the Torah and God are absolutely one. They are not merely organs of the king, as are the mitzvot. So the mitzvot are God's will that he puts into his hand. He says, here, let me extend my hand. Come grab it. The Torah is God. So when we study the Torah, we are ingesting. When you study something and you learn it, you digest it. You internalize it. We are internalizing God because God is internalized in the Torah. And if you understand it from a very practical way, like let's say back to the mikveh example. Who's more connected to the project? The builder who's building the building, or the designer who's poring over the blueprints, right? Designing, really trying to get into what is meant. What did the architect mean when he put that in there? When we study the Torah, we're studying the blueprints. We're getting into the mind of what the essence of it comes from. And remember, the mitzvot are instructions that are in the Torah. So we do the mitzvot. I mean, if we just stay in the Torah and we don't actually build a building, then we won't actually get to experience the building. So that's the advantage of mitzvahs, actually, which is a very big topic in the Tanya, and a very big topic actually that the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, whose picture is on our house wall, right, who passed away recently in 1994. So he was one of his huge themes was the advantage of mitzvahs, because how the Torah, you may be uniting with God, but the mitzvahs, you actually get to help people, and you actually get to affect change in the world. But yet we analyze the advantage of both. So the advantage of Torah is that we are uniting with God. It's one. We're ingesting God's word, God's will, God's knowledge, its wisdom. It becomes one with us. And the mitzvahs is when it actually gets to take fruit and affect the world. And I want to conclude with the idea of this idea of truth. Okay, so there's like a little formula. You know how if you do algebra, you've got a formula, and then it creates a line. So the formula is when you study Torah in order to connect with God's will. That's the formula, the intent. When we study Torah and we recognize, actually that's why in the morning prayers, is the blessings of the Torah. And that's why before the Torah is read on Shabbat, we have the bar mitzvah boys go, Baruch Atah Hashem. What are they singing? The blessing of the Torah. That's create the intent. that we are now about to study or read the Torah that is God's will, that is God's word and his wisdom. When we approach the study that way, it doesn't matter how much we actually succeed in understanding. We're on that line of unity with God. Maybe we understand this much, maybe we understand this much, but it's the same function. It's the same line of truth that we are with God. So it doesn't matter how smart you are. You can even be just reading the words with the intent of connecting. You're there. There's another sentence at the end that says, I like concluding this way, but since I started, Im ein yira, ein chachma. It's actually not in here. I didn't print it. But this just popped out at me right in the middle of the page, the back page. Oh, yes! I'm so glad I read that. There's another thing I wanted to say. So another Kabbalistic terminology. Okay, this is something kind of new, but very, very basic in the Kabbalah knowledge. So when God created the earth with the tzimtzum, right? The squishing himself. The energy that succeeded in getting into each object is just the right amount of energy that object could handle and function as that object. The cup, me, the table, the pen, the Torah, everything has just the right amount of energy. It's like when you fill up a cup for a child of juice, you give them just the right amount. You're focusing that they get just the right amount. Anything that you do with the intent that you are really thinking about what that person needs, and you give them just that, you say just the right words that they need to hear, right? That's called mimale kol almin. That's called, the type of energy is called filling the earth. Filling type of energy. Mimale, that's the word that you want to remember, mimale. So that's how the earth functions, right? Because everything gets exactly what it needs and exactly what it can handle. Just the right match. There's another type of energy called sovev. Sovev, like Liat knows, means surrounding. Sivuv, sviva, those are all words from the same root that may be familiar to you. Sevivon, a dreidel that goes around and around. So, sovev kol almin, which is Aramaic for surrounds the earth. This is a circular energy also. Memale is more linear, right? Because we're pouring into each person's cup. Sovev is circular energy. And it's transcendent. It doesn't fit each person. It's like an equal energy that encompasses all of us. It's just we're all in it. We're all in Sovev Kol Almin, but we can't internalize that energy. We internalize the Mimale. We internalize that.
What is it for, the Sovev?
It's just a fact. The fact that God, in other words, God put effort into Mimale to contain himself, so that we can all appreciate the energy we have within us. But actually, it's not. The energy of God is not limited to what matches me, and the energy of God is not limited to what matches this. There's also the fact that God encompasses and surrounds everything in one just equal energy for everyone. So it's around us. We interact with it when we study Torah, but we don't internalize it necessarily. Even the Kabbalah tells us that in this process of tzimtzum, there are 4 spiritual worlds. This world is called Asiya, action. The one before is called Yetzirah, formation. The one before that is called Bria, creation, because it's the first aspect of that there is a little bit of a creation. And then before that is Atzilut, which means that it's really just like God's like, what do you call it? The heart protector, the pericardium. It's like God's pericardium. Like it's just right around God. That's the 4 worlds, right? I'm like We're going to do this again and again. You don't need to remember these, but just the concept is what we're going for. So all those worlds above us don't internalize Sovev. They internalize the Mimale amount that they get. They will get more Mimale. They will get deeper Mimale. They will get more abstract Mimale, like the internalized energy, but yet they're getting the amount that they can internalize. I will, as a human being, I will get a more like processed aspect of Mimale energy in me, yet it's Mimale just like the angels one, just like the one from higher worlds. But even though as a human being I get a very small, or I don't know what the word is, a very whatever aspect of Mimale, and especially because I'm a human, I'll get to that, I have access to Sovev, to this energy, whereas the upper worlds do not. And you know where I'm going with this. How? Because I can study Torah. And Torah is where God's infinite energy is. It transcends. When we study Torah, we may not realize, remember, it's not about how much we understand. We may not realize that we're internalizing God's energy, yet we are. We are. When we study Torah with the intent to connect, like I said, the line on algebra, we are connecting with God's Sovev. And like I said before, maybe even especially because we are human, we have that access. It's almost like when you talk, like when as parents, if you are a parent, or if you are, or maybe you experience this as your parents doing this, they'll talk around a young child like more openly, right? They'll talk about your secrets or whatever private information if there's a 2-year-old in the room, but not if there's a 12-year-old in the room, right? Because with the 2-year-old, your parents are more free with. They're giving their full energy, because the 2-year-old doesn't really understand anyways. Whereas the 12-year-old, they're going to hold back. With God, he's more free with us human beings. He doesn't do that. He doesn't give that to the angels. He doesn't give that to the higher worlds. He gives us the Torah. So we bypass all of that spiritual, the spiritual creations that are more spiritual than we are. We have access to the essence of God, because God, remember, it all comes back to the very same theme again and again, because God wanted physical beings to connect with the divine and the infinite.
Because they don't need it.
They want it. They're jealous. You know the story of the angels in the Midrash, that the angels were jealous of the Jewish people. Moses had to steal the prayer from them. I mean, there's so many stories of like mystical stories, right? You can believe they're literal. You don't even have to believe they're literal. The point is, the message of all of these stories is that the angels wish they could be us. Because we have access to infinity. We have access to freedom of choice, which unlocks infinity. And they don't. They have whatever they've been given. They've been given X amount of spiritual energy, and they operate from that.
You always want what you don't have.
Yeah.
No? And then when they get it, they will say, no, we don't want it.
But we are also taught another midrash that I think this is actually in other cultures as well, and not only Judaism, that if we were given a few different lives to choose from, we always choose our own. Have you heard that?
Of course.
Yeah.
Because you know your own. You know your struggle, and you know you're good, and you don't
know why?
What, let's say, whoever here, right, going through. Like, I choose my life. I don't know what this one going through, even though her life look amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know her struggle. I'd rather deal with what I know.
And because we also have the idea that God gives us what we can handle.
Exactly.
So if we have a challenge, we also know that we have the energy to overcome that challenge, since the proof is that we have the challenge. He wouldn't give us what we don't have.
You don't really see it.
That's our work.
You don't think that you can go out of that challenge.
We have that stage. We have that part of us where we're like, what is even happening? And then we dig deeper and we find it.
Most of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm talking about when we do find it, right? We
Yeah.
we realize later, oh yeah, I found it. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions?
This was pretty intense.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Oh my God. It was intense for me last night when I was like reading it and I'm like,
There was a lot of
whew,
concepts.
a lot.
Very
Yeah.
abstract.
But it's good. I actually like it.
Yeah, no, this is the meditation, if we were to meditate, is the amazingness. And that's actually the way the Tanya chapter concludes. It says, if you meditate, im yira ein chachama. If there is no fear, there is no wisdom. This is the Tanya's conclusion, the chapter's conclusion.
Say it again. If there is no
Im
fear.
ein, this is a quote. By the way, the Tanya is basically quotes. This was in our introduction of studying this book. So nothing is made up. It's all quotes from different parts of the Torah. So this quote is from the Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, in the Mishnah era, which is the Roman era. So this is a wisdom that says, Im ein chachma, im ein yira, ein chachma. If there is no fear, there is no wisdom. Which means, if you do not have a desire to connect and learn, you won't learn. Learning comes from a desire to learn. Learning comes from an appreciation of what there is to learn. Right? So that's the yirah. The yirah is fear, but it's actually awe and appreciation.
Can you say it again? If you don't have the desire to learn,
Then you don't learn.
okay.
So that's like with the blessings before studying the Torah. That's the intent. When we have the intent, then the chachma, then the wisdom comes. But wait, it doesn't finish there. The same is said in reverse. But if there's no wisdom, there is no fear. And actually, I could have started this whole thing and say, it's a contradiction. Why does it say it opposite? It's because it's not a contradiction. It's a progression. First, we have the appreciation that opens up the learning to us. Im ein yirah, appreciation, awe, then comes the chachma, the wisdom. But then, once we have wisdom, once we're learning, comes the appreciation. Whoa, this is what we're learning. So when we meditate on what we do when we study Torah, the fact that we are basically transcending time and space, we are getting a taste of the truth of existence that this world limits us from normally noticing when we study the divine. And that brings us to this incredible awe.
So the word fear in that is awe.
Most of the time, by the way, when the Torah talks about fear in terms of service of God, it is awe. With the exception of the fear of punishment or the fear of disconnecting from God. But the more elevated, sophisticated fear is awe. Yeah. So we can take a moment and we can close our eyes and just think about what we are doing now as we are studying the Tanya, which is the Torah, being that it's a collection of quotations of the Torah and explaining it to us in the way that we can, gives us a directive of a how-to, right? That's what Tanya is for us. But when we take a moment to appreciate what we have been doing, we have been talking about Hashem. We have been trying to understand who we are, how we connect, and the fact that when we study Torah, when we have these conversations, we are transcending time, space, physicality. And we are rising and elevating beyond. You can visualize expanding upwards and outwards, along with the infinite energy that's inside of us. It's like that piece of Hashem that we have in us, that piece of infinity that is always there, gets a moment to shine, gets a moment to expand outward, upward, fill all of us. Visualize even this godly energy expanding beyond ourselves and our body limitations to affect the energy in the room. Interact with the energy of the other souls in this room and their expansions, and to mingle as one. Maybe the way water vapor mingles and spreads and vaporizes. With the truth. The deepest truth of our souls. And what it's here to do. Its inherent goodness. This aspect of you becomes who you are. And becomes your narrative. As it finds affinity in the words of the Torah, in the ideas of the Torah. It's very comfortable. It is one. And it is in you. And feel free to stay here, visualizing this experience that you are in fact having. And opening your eyes when you're ready to integrate this incredible experience with the life that we are meant to be living. Thank you guys so much. Any more reflections, your questions, you're welcome to ask.
I had a professor in graduate school. He was a priest, and he taught a philosophy class. And I loved when he talked about the work that you're doing in the world, and how it reminded me of what you were saying, like that our that our arms are extensions, and so when we're doing the mitzvot, he talked about like if you're just doing your dishes, being mindful. There's a lot about mindfulness.
Yeah,
and
which is the
purpose,
intention, right?
Intention. And I was very young at the time, and when you're young, you're just running around doing stuff. You're not, you're just like getting things done, not necessarily with intention, because you're young, you have all this energy and you have all these things to do, and then when you get older, you slow down a little bit and you have more time for intention.
Yeah, totally.
So thinking about that as a young person, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And I tried to incorporate it here and there. But
That's cool that you thought it was cool as a young person.
But I was running around,
Yeah.
doing, but it's that same idea, that like that intentional, purposeful, because I was thinking just like from going from that beautiful moment that you just had us all do with the closing our eyes and we're studying Torah, we're being with God, and now we have to like go to the grocery store, like how do you make that transition a little easier, because it's hard. Nobody wants to leave right now, but we
Right.
all have to go do the things. But if we do the things with the intention of why am I going to the grocery store? Well,
Yeah.
I'm also being purposeful
Yes.
and serving,
Yes.
right?
And in the fact is that is what's happening. The truth is that when you're going to the grocery store and buying food for your family and cooking it, you are literally nourishing the divine of your family.
Right.
You are doing that, whether or not you're mindful of it. But when you're mindful of it, you're tapped into the truth of what's happening.
And then you can make the choices that lead you closer to the divine,
Yes.
or further
Yes.
away.
Yes. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
It reminds me of a Spanish movie where there's a cook, and she is, whenever she's cooking, so she's making a cake, for example, and if she's super happy, then everybody, when they're eating the meal, they're all laughing, they're all having the best of times. And when she's crying because something else is happening, same is happening with the
When they
food.
eat it.
Exactly. So the
I love
energy-
that visualization.
Yes,
Yes,
is-
I
is
love it.
shared.
By the way, it's actually also true. I noticed that when I'm stressed out in cooking and like maybe upset, the food comes out different.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you're cooking with love, like it's so much better.
It comes out better.
Comes out better.
I mean, it can be traced back to maybe more effort or whatever, but it doesn't matter. The point is it comes out better.
Yeah, it's like that energy.
Yeah,
that
energy is a thing.
Energy is a thing.
Yeah.
But which one is it? Is it the energy from God, or is it the energy from you?
Answer the question. It's one and the same, right? We are, right? Our godly soul is God, so it's coming through us.
Okay.
Yeah.
But no, I was more about this melech, or
The
like-
king, yes. This idea of the
Yes.
king. Remember, these examples of king is because there were kings at the time, right? But the idea of awe, really, and that's really what I meant. I got sidetracked, but what the Tanya is telling us is that when we really tap into this idea of unity, when we study, we actually come to awe. We actually come to be like amazed by what we're doing. Like, whoa. Right? Maybe we can try that next time.
To what we're doing here, for
Mhm.
sure.
That awe.
But
Yeah.
it is hard to find this awe, this awe that you're talking, just by reading the words in the Torah. And for me,
Yes.
it's a different
And
dimension.
that's in the chapter. It says not everybody. It says it in here. That's where the function, right? The formula and the line.
Yes.
Not everybody, or even if you can, not all the time, do you experience the appreciation of what you're doing, yet you're doing it.
Okay.
It's like when you're going shopping and you're not really tapped into the amazing thing that you're doing of feeding your family, yet you are feeding your family.
But this awe, can you affiliate it with joy?
Awe is usually, I would like to
there's
maybe
that.
meditate that through and see what happens. What does the awe feel like? It's usually, joy is usually associated with love. And it's like, there's 3 lines of emotion, right? There's the love, chesed, kindness side, and then there's the fear, discipline, awe side, and then there's the compassion that comes in the middle that fuses the two. Gratitude can be awe. Gratitude is awe.
For me, awe,
Yeah.
maybe I have a bad understanding of this word,
Yeah.
but for me, awe is when you're like, you're speechless.
Mhm.
Yes,
in
that's
front
correct.
Yeah.
Of the immensity
Mhm.
of
Something. Yeah,
and you're
could be
just-
anything.
You're like,
And it takes your breath
Yeah,
away.
takes your breath away.
Imagine-
Yeah, like the
Yes.
like the Grand
Something like that.
Canyon. Like I just
That's
walked
what it is.
over the Grand Canyon and I was just like
It is. That's it.
I would say that would be like my biggest awe experience of my life. Just seeing the Grand Canyon.
Nature
Just like
brings you awe. I agree, but for
Yeah.
me, nature brings me more awe than studying the Torah or reading the Torah. So, when
but there
you
is
say
a
awe,
meditation
I feel
that the
like-
Tanya says that what we do, why is the prayers, if you read the prayers that lead up to the Shema,
Yes.
especially like a little bit before that, not right before the Shema, but before that, it's all about the earth, the world, describing the earth. Why? Because when you go, that's why there's so many Kabbalists meditate in nature, right? When you connect with the nature, and then you connect with the creator of the nature, that is a path to awe of God.
It doesn't necessarily happen when you're sitting in synagogue and you're reading the Torah. I mean, or pray. Well, when you're praying from a prayer book. When you're reading Torah, it's when
Yes.
the Torah comes out.
Yes.
It's just, I think it's hard to grasp it.
Yes, it takes more concentration than when you're actually in nature.
Right.
But so
Yes.
what you're saying is that regardless whether we truly feel it or not, if we start studying it with the intent, you're anyway,
You're on the path.
you're on that path.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's reassuring.
It
Yeah,
is.
because
when we were in school,
there's so much to
when we
learn
used
and
to
it
pray
becomes
every
more
morning,
meaningful.
the teacher used to tell us that we have to
Word.
say
Right.
the word and not just read it in our,
Yes.
like you have to
More
really say
Yes.
it in your brain.
Ancient
That's the only
stories
way that
and then
you're
in
really
your
gonna feel
emotions.
connected.
Like
Right.
you just look at a bottle.
Because you're
Right.
taking physical
That's it.
action. It's
And
very,
sure,
it's not only in Torah, but it's also in even just like learning something. Like
Yeah.
I always tell the kids, like put your finger on, like points with your finger when you're learning how to read. Like using your body kinesthetically creates a feedback loop back into feeling it more.
Though we have this difficulty,
Yeah.
we might
All right.